Anna from NHCSR here. It is wintertime and it's the time of year that we are assessing our needs for the future, planning out potential research projects for the field season. I'm doing a lot of reading. So every once in a while I come across a real page turner and I thought I might as well share some of these papers that I think are so amazing, do a little summary, just a little book report going through the blow by blow and pulling in some pictures and diagrams and tables from those papers. And I came across one reading about Swede Midge. And this is a review paper put together by the best in the biz that you'll see here. This is all the folks who have been investigating this pest in the regions that are being affected by this invasive pest. Elizabeth Hodgson had studied this species as a PhD student with Yolanda Chen at University of Vermont, and she is now in extension in New York State on the vegetable team. So if you're growing vegetables in New York, you're in luck. So let's dive in. So we all know that brassica vegetables are a really critical staple for organic systems in particular, and this paper focuses on those folks. But you should know that this fly is native to Eurasia, so it's come here to North America. We think it came around the 2000 time point, and it's kind of quietly spread from its original point to 15 US states and 5 Canadian provinces. So that gives you a sense of the latitude of where it has been impacting brassica crops. So what makes Swede midge so hard to manage? First, let's dig into the life cycle, and that'll kind of explain why it's such a tricky animal. We have a beautiful picture here that shows that you have these adults who are emerging from the soil. They'll pupate in the soil, emerge from the soil, come out and lay eggs. And those eggs are teeny tiny, you really can't see them, and it's the larvae that are causing the damage. So they're burrowing in, they're causing all sorts of trouble. And this diagram is so nice because they actually point to different places where you could do some kind of control. So you would have to know that adults are flying in order to take advantage of some of these control mechanisms. So Swede midge larvae are feeding deep inside the apical bud, and they're secreting enzymes. They're distorting plant growth. So one larva can ruin an entire head of broccoli, an entire cauliflower head. You're not going to see the damage until it is too late. And so this is what we're seeing. We're seeing distorted leaves, distorted leaves and petioles, scarring, damaged meristematic tissues, so like that really fast-growing tissues that you'll see that are super important to heading crops. This might look a little bit like some other physiological things, but there will be some cues later on down the road that say, no, that is a fly developing inside that growing point. They also shared a late instar Swede midge larval feeding at the base of new leaves within a cauliflower meristem. So, later on down the road, you'll see strong evidence that this is not a physiological or nutritional problem. This is a fly. But of course, it's far too late to do anything about that at this point. So unlike caterpillars or flea beetles that also attack these crops, Swede midge can't be scouted visually. Monitoring requires pheromone traps, specialized ID skills, and pretty much constant vigilance from May to November. So that's when these adult flies are flying, and there's multiple generations. I am only being a little bit hyperbolic when I say there's about a bajillion Cecidomyid species out there, right? So like most of them are benign. They're just living in the soil, like not bothering anybody. But there's some other Cecidomyid pests and beneficials that you might know. Like if you ever taken an IPM class, you would have heard of Hessian fly. That's a cousin of this guy. If you are managing pests in a greenhouse, you might have heard of Aphidoletes aphidomyza. This is a really powerful tool for controlling aphids in greenhouses. So their larvae are predatory. They're the good guys for us, but most of them are pretty benign. If you have a yellow sticky card out there, it's going to be covered in midges that look just like this. But If you're nasty, I will leave a link in the notes below with some information about how monitoring is done by the experts. And if you want to get serious about it, pull it out. So we touched on this a little bit, why organic management keeps failing. So conventional growers often rely on systemic insecticides like imidacloprid, but organic growers are left with a few options, and most OMRI-listed products don't work. Okay, the authors of this paper have given us a nice table showing some of the products that are approved for use in OMRI systems, the trials that have been conducted so far. So Abby Seaman is working in Western New York, so not too far away from where these trials in Ontario were held. And you'll see that even some of the products that had some success, it's kind of mixed. I'm going to guess that has to do with timing of application. Surround clay, so this is something that you put on preemptively, and it's supposed to create a barrier. There's a possibility of that. But again, in order for that to work, you would certainly need to know if and when you have flies flying around and impacting your crop. So organic broccoli growers are reporting losses that exceed profitability margins. Weekly sprays, crop losses, failed trials, that's kind of the name of the game here. But I really like this paper. They put together this table. If you were looking at exclusion netting, here's all the things that go into you doing exclusion netting and kind of comparing and contrasting whether or not it makes sense to protect your crop with that versus some of the sprays that have hit or miss effects. So, over the past couple of decades, researchers have tested plant essential oils, exclusion netting, intercropping, mating disruption. There have been some attempts to develop a mating disruption. That's Elizabeth Hodgson's research. Most tactics have failed, but a few show promise. Crop susceptibility does matter. And so we do have a table presented to us from the authors about the differences in severity that have been observed in different crops. I will point out right here where we're looking at kale. The authors here, Izzo and Lewins, they do a good job of pointing out that kale, what we call kale, is sometimes really different species. So your Oleracea are less attractive to this fly than your Napus species. So that's interesting. They have been evaluating some trap cropping approaches, keeping in mind that red Russian kale could be used as a trap crop. More on that later. In terms of cultural controls, there's some good news and some bad news. So strategic crop rotation and planting dates can help. In New York, planting fall brassicas after July helps avoid peak midge emergence. So those overwintering pupae when adults emerge. Also, isolating fields with hedgerows or wooded buffers can reduce infestations. Authors say that even a separation of 500 feet, especially if paired with these natural barriers, can make a difference. So these are very small flies. They're probably not covering a lot of distance. And that might explain why this fly has been spreading so slowly. So what's next? The authors provide us with this really cool decision tree. So they say, do you have the space to rotate? This is not the case with a lot of our organic growers. They're growing in pretty small areas. If you don't have the space, do you really need to be growing brassicas year round? I think this is a big pressure for people who, want to have something in their CSA boxes constantly. They want to have these greens on the shelves year round. If that's important, the authors suggest exclusion and making that investment in the infrastructure. If you are able to forego brassicas during a certain time of year, crop rotation from a temporal point of view is something to think about, or only growing certain species that are less susceptible. Looking towards the future and looking and talking to the extension folks who are in this area, they really want better monitoring tools. I think part of that is because a lot of the growers who are not yet affected by this, because it hasn't arrived in their region, they kind of trust Extension to keep an eye out for things like this. We have a pretty good track record of keeping people informed. So Extension wants better tools for monitoring. So we're thinking about finding out how expensive it is to do molecular tools, testing different trap designs, things that make monitoring for our extension professionals a little bit easier. I think that is probably next step for us. So when I reach out to the experts in this, I'm going to ask them, what is the possibility of this? How expensive would it be to set up a monitoring system that has molecular tools involved? But please let us know what interests you. What would you like to know more about? Is this something that's of concern for you at all? Leave a comment.